There is a particular kind of pain that does not have a clean name. It is not grief exactly, though it feels like grief. It is not heartbreak exactly, though it breaks something in you. It is the pain of looking at a person you loved completely, a person you trusted with every private and unguarded part of yourself, and realizing that the whole time you were building something together, they were quietly, deliberately, taking it apart. It is the pain of betrayal from the one person you never thought to protect yourself from, because you never thought you needed to. She was my best friend, and she stole my life. Or at least she tried to. What she did not understand, what she could not have understood, because she had never looked at me carefully enough to see who I actually was, is that the life she stole was not the life I was meant to live. And the moment she took it, she set me free to build the one I was always supposed to have. My name is Elena, and this is the story of the most painful thing that ever happened to me, and the best thing that ever happened to me, and how those two things turned out to be exactly the same event. Priya and I met when we were 19. First week of college, same dormitory floor, rooms 4 doors apart. We became friends the way you become friends at that age, quickly and completely, with the full, unguarded openness that you can only manage before life has taught you to be careful. We stayed up until 3 a.m. talking about everything. Our families, our fears, what we wanted, who we thought we were, who we hoped we would become. We ate every meal together. We studied in the same corner of the same library. We cried at each other's disappointments and celebrated each other's small victories with a genuineness that I have not often found since. She was brilliant, Priya. Genuinely brilliant. The kind of person who understood things quickly and deeply and could articulate them in a way that made other people feel seen. She was also beautiful and funny and magnetic, and the kind of person who, when she walked into a room, rearranged it subtly without meaning to, so that everyone was slightly oriented toward her. I loved her for all of these things. I did not envy them. That is important to say because people will assume I must have, that there must have been some undercurrent of competition from the beginning. There was not. I was genuinely happy that my best friend was extraordinary. I thought it reflected well on both of us that we had found each other. I was different from Priya in ways that felt complementary back then. Where she was fast, I was thorough. Where she was loud and captivating, I was quieter but more consistent. I had a steadiness she often said she envied, a way of working through problems methodically that she admired. I was a graphic designer by training and by nature, someone who thought visually, who built things carefully and with intention. I had a portfolio by the time I graduated that I was proud of. I had a vision for what I wanted to build. After college, we moved to the same city. We got an apartment together. We worked in different fields. She went into communications, and I started my design career. But our lives remained braided together. Saturday mornings at the same cafe. Phone calls every other day. Holidays spent partly with each other's families. She was the first person I called when anything happened, good or bad, and I was the same for her, or I believed I was. I met Marcus in the 3rd year of living in that city. He was a photographer, thoughtful and specific and deeply curious about the world, and I fell in love with him in the slow, accumulating way that feels more real than the sudden kind. I told Priya everything about him from the beginning. I described our first date and our second, and the conversation we had on a rooftop one evening in early summer when I first understood that this might be serious. She listened to all of it with the warmth and attention that I had always associated with her love for me. She met him 4 months into our relationship, at a dinner I organized. I watched her charm him the way she charmed everyone, and I felt proud to be showing 2 important people to each other. I noticed that he was drawn to her in the way everyone was drawn to Priya, that gravitational thing she had, and I felt nothing alarming about it. Why would I? She was my best friend. He was the man I was falling in love with. These were my 2 safest people. I should tell you that what I am about to describe did not happen all at once. It crept. It built in the way that the worst things build, gradually and beneath the surface, using the ordinary textures of daily life as camouflage. A canceled plan here, a slightly strange energy at a group gathering, a comment from a mutual friend that did not quite add up. I dismissed each of these individually the way you dismiss things when you do not want to see them, when the truth is too large and too painful to look at directly. It was 18 months after I had introduced them that I found out. Not through a dramatic confrontation or a discovered message, through a mutual friend who could not hold it anymore and told me on a quiet afternoon over tea, with the look on her face of someone who had been carrying something too heavy for too long. She told me that Priya and Marcus had been seeing each other for 4 months. She told me that several people in our wider circle knew. She told me that she was sorry she had not told me sooner. I remember the quality of the light in that room. I remember the sound of a bus going past outside. I remember looking down at my tea and the surface of it being very still and thinking, incongruously, that it was strange how still it was when everything else had just shattered. I drove home. I sat in my car outside my apartment for a long time. Then I went inside and I sat on the floor of my kitchen, which I had never done before or since, and I felt the full weight of it. Not just Marcus, though that was devastating enough. Marcus I could grieve cleanly, the way you grieve a relationship that ends, with sorrow and time and eventually some acceptance. What undid me completely was Priya. The 18 months of performed concern, the questions she had asked me about my relationship, knowing what she knew. The times she had held my hand when I was anxious about something with Marcus, knowing what she knew. The years of friendship that now had a question mark thrown backward across all of them. How much of it had been real? How much of the woman I had built my adult life around had actually existed? That is the question that haunted me. Not the betrayal in its final form, but the retroactive uncertainty. The way it recolored everything behind it. I did not call her that night. I did not call Marcus. I made myself eat something. I called my sister, who lived in another city, and talked to her for 2 hours. Then I went to bed, and I stared at the ceiling, and I let myself feel the full dimension of what had happened without trying to manage it or minimize it or fix it. I gave myself that night to just be destroyed by it. The next morning I got up. I showered, I made coffee, and I started thinking clearly. I want to be honest about what I felt in those early days because I think honesty matters here more than a clean narrative. I felt rage. Real, bone-deep, white-hot rage at both of them, but particularly at Priya, because Marcus and I had been together for under 2 years, but Priya and I had been friends for nearly a decade. What she had taken was not just a relationship. She had taken my trust. She had taken my history. She had taken the version of myself that existed inside a friendship I had believed was permanent. She had taken my safety. I wanted to ruin her. I will not pretend otherwise. In those early weeks, I fantasized about it in the middle of the night, about exposing her to everyone who admired her, about letting the people who thought she was wonderful see exactly what she was capable of. I held those fantasies the way you hold something hot, and they warmed me for a while with their anger. And then gradually I started letting them go. Not because I was a saint, not because I forgave her quickly or easily, but because I began to understand that every minute I spent planning her destruction was a minute I was not spending on my own rebuilding. And my rebuilding was more important than her destruction. My life was more important than her punishment. I went to therapy. This is not a small thing to mention, and I am not going to minimize it. I found a therapist I trusted, and I went every week for a year, and it was the most honest and difficult and ultimately transformative work I have ever done. We did not just talk about Priya and Marcus. We talked about patterns, about the ways I had historically made myself smaller in that friendship, had given more than I had received, and told myself this was generosity rather than imbalance. About the part of me that had chosen Priya partly because her brilliance and magnetism reflected something back to me that I had not yet learned to generate from inside myself. About what it meant to build my sense of safety on another person's love, rather than on my own foundation. This was uncomfortable territory. It would have been easier to stay entirely in the narrative where I was simply a victim and she was simply a villain. That narrative was available to me, and parts of it were true. But the more interesting and more useful territory was the internal one. What had I learned about myself? What did I need to change? Not because I was responsible for her choices. I was not. But because I was responsible for my own life going forward, and I needed to understand myself better to build it differently. During this time, I poured everything into my work. This was partly coping and partly genuine ambition that had been sitting slightly suppressed under the weight of a life organized too heavily around another person. I began taking on larger design projects. I developed a visual identity series for a group of small businesses in the city that got written up in an industry publication. I started teaching a design workshop on Saturday mornings, partly for the income and partly because I discovered I loved it, that something in me came alive when I was helping other people see and develop their own visual instincts. My reputation in the design community began growing. Slowly, then less slowly. I worked with discipline and without drama. I took every project seriously regardless of its size. I asked for feedback and used it. I invested in my craft the way you invest in something you have decided is worth your full commitment. And I found, in the work, something that the friendship with Priya had perhaps been substituting for without my realizing it. A sense of identity that was entirely mine, that no one could take, that existed independently of anyone else's perception of me. I moved to a new apartment, smaller but mine alone, chosen for the light that came through the east-facing windows in the morning. I filled it with plants and books and art I had made myself and pieces I had collected from other designers whose work I loved. I cooked for myself and had friends over, and built a life that fit me rather than fitting what I had thought someone else needed from me. New friendships came. Slower than the Priya friendship had been, more deliberate, built on the more careful terms I had learned to require. A woman named Sophie from the design world who was funny and honest, and who challenged me in ways that made me better. A couple I met through the workshop who became important to me over time. Friendships that developed without the breathless, total merger of my college years. Friendships with some air in them, some individual space, which I now understood was not distance, but health. About 14 months after I found out, I ran into Marcus. Not planned, not engineered, just the ordinary collision of two people who live in the same city. We were in line at a coffee shop on a Thursday morning. He saw me first. I watched him consider whether to pretend he had not seen me and decide against it. He said my name. I said his. We stood for a moment in the awkward physics of people who have unfinished business in a public place. He apologized. Not at length, not with the kind of elaborate self-justification that some people use to make an apology about themselves, but simply and directly. He said he had handled it badly and he was sorry, and that he had not intended to hurt me, though he understood that his intentions were not the point. I listened to him. I said I appreciated that. I ordered my coffee. I left. And I drove to my studio, and I spent the day doing work I was proud of, and I did not think about him again that day, until much later when I was falling asleep, and I noticed, with some surprise, that the thought of him no longer produced the physical sensation of pain it once had. It had become something smaller, something that was passing. Priya I did not run into. She had moved, I heard through the remaining threads of our mutual social world, to a different part of the city. She and Marcus, I gathered, were still together. I had no particular feeling about this. I wished them whatever they were capable of, not warmly, not with any investment in their happiness, but with the particular neutrality that comes when someone has finally become truly irrelevant to you. 2 years after everything fell apart, I was offered a position as creative director at a design studio I deeply respected. The offer came because of the work I had done, the reputation I had built, the specific and visible choices I had made in my career during the period when I had thrown everything I had into the craft. I sat with the offer for a week before accepting, thinking it through carefully the way I thought through important decisions now, without the pressure of someone else's opinion shaping mine. I accepted. I started on a Monday. I walked into that studio and looked at the space, at the light and the work on the walls and the people sitting at their desks, and I felt something I want to describe accurately because I think it matters. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel the particular sharp satisfaction of having beaten someone. I felt, more simply and more completely than that, at home. Like I had walked into a room I was supposed to be in. Like the last 2 years of difficult and painful and necessary work had brought me exactly here, to this place, to this version of myself. I thought about Priya briefly that morning. I thought about the night I sat on my kitchen floor. I thought about what she had taken and what had grown in the space where it used to be. And I felt something I had not expected to feel about her, which was a complicated and genuine gratitude. Not for the betrayal, not for the pain, but for the inadvertent gift of it. She had taken a life I was living on someone else's terms, and in the rubble of that, I had built one entirely on my own. She had not intended to give me anything. She had intended to take. But what she did not understand, what she never had understood because she had never looked at me carefully enough to see it, was that I was a builder. That is what I do. I take materials, however I find them, however broken, and I make something from them. That is the designer's instinct, and it is also, I have learned, the truest thing about who I am. I have a studio now. 12 people work there. We do work I am proud of every single day. I have friendships that are real and deep and honest. I have a relationship, a new one, careful and good, with a man who sees me clearly and whom I have chosen with my eyes open rather than with the desperate, grateful love of someone who has not yet learned to trust herself. I have a morning routine I love and a kitchen I have cooked thousands of meals in, and a bookshelf that tells the true story of who I am, and a design practice that bears my name and reflects my vision. I did not get revenge in the way I once imagined it. There was no confrontation, no exposure, no public humiliation. I did not need those things. Every single day, I woke up and chose to build something rather than burn something. And over time, those daily choices accumulated into a life that required nothing from the person who tried to take everything. That is the revenge I planned. Not the one I thought I was planning in those furious, sleepless early weeks, but the one that matters, the one that lasts, the one that is entirely, indestructibly mine. She took what she thought was my life. She did not understand that a life cannot be stolen. It can only be built. And no one can build yours but you. No one can take it once you have really built it. Not a friend who betrays you, not a lover who leaves, not anyone. I planned the perfect revenge, and the perfect revenge was this: a life so full and so genuinely mine that the woman who tried to take it became a footnote, a small story in the opening chapters of something much larger, a necessary difficulty, a wound that healed into the toughest skin I have. The best revenge is not taking something from the person who wronged you. The best revenge is realizing they never actually had the power to take anything from you that you could not rebuild better. The best revenge is your own life, built on your own terms, lit from inside by your own unbreakable sense of who you are. The best revenge is becoming so completely yourself that what they did to you becomes the smallest part of your story. And the smallest part of my story is exactly where it belongs.